wasn't there disqualification or something because Bill Alvarez was too young?
Yeah, he was only 16. He wasn't even quite 16. So we were at Guthrie Park that night, and Sam Alvarez was there. We got in a big battle because they were running over us physically, and they made Bill Alvarez quit playing. He was our third baseman, and Wesley Starnes was our shortstop. And they made Bill quit playing because he wasn't quite 16 yet, 2 weeks before his 16th birthday. We had a lot of fun, but we were a bunch of rednecks. Go ahead.
I think you're on.
Okay.
And along came Fay.
First of all, you were talking about where you used to live. When I came into the family, they lived on, wait a minute, Waldron, and lived there for several years, and then they bought a house on Poppin Drive, and that was the first house they'd ever owned.
I didn't live on Poppin Drive.
But the family did.
Mother and Dad and Bernice.
My mother and father married in 1920.
Year I was born.
And I was born in 1925. My mother was a school teacher at the time, and she taught there in Aquila. And after they married, she had to quit because they wouldn't hire a married teacher, married woman teacher. Now it's all right to have a married man teacher. So you see, sex discrimination began, or was in existence way back then. But my dad was a farm boy. After a while, I'll get into his history, okay?
Sure.
But anyway, I was born when they lived at the old hotel, as it was called. It was a former hotel. It seemed big to me, but I think it probably was not that big. And I remember one day, I think I was probably about 18 months old. I was standing in front of the screen door, which was latched, so I couldn't get out. Mother was in the bed, she was sick. And I can remember this. Somebody walked by on the sidewalk out front, and I hollered out and I said, Miss Hattie's sick. That was what she was called, Miss Hattie, the school teacher, you know. Her name was Harriet, but she was called Hattie. And the woman said, she is. Who's keeping you? And I said, Albert. Robert.
That was Daddy, huh?
Yeah.
Pop.
Albert. And I remember that Mother taught a private kindergarten when we lived there, and one of the students was my cousin Verna, and she let me sit in the seat with Verna, who was about 5 years older than I was, 4 or 5. And I asked Verna to let me look at one of her books, and she did. Then I asked her for her scissors, and she gave it to me. And yeah, I started cutting on her book.
Uh-oh.
It was her fault for doing it.
Yeah.
It was all her fault. Another thing that happened when we lived there was the old hotel was across the street from Grandpa's Texaco filling station, which I remember had a glass tank at the top of the pump. And the way you filled up that tank up above by pumping an old arm lever back and forth. And if you wanted, say, 5 gallons of gas, you'd pump up the gas to the 5-gallon mark in that glass tank at the top. And then just let it run by gravity into the gas tank. And I'll come back to that service station in a minute if you remind me. So anyway, I guess I was about 18 months old, and I decided that I wanted to go across to the service station, and so I did. I started out by myself. And Uncle Jack happened to see me, and that I was about to get run over out there, and he ran and grabbed me and saved me from getting some car running over me.
Wow.
He was, let me think, when I was about 5 or 6, he was about 16. So I guess he was about 10 or 11, 12 years older than I was. But I thought he was a grown man then.
That was your daddy's brother or your mother's brother?
My daddy's brother, he was the youngest child in their family.
And he lived with y'all for a while?
No, he never did live with us, but Grandpa and Grandma lived just down the street, and Uncle Jack was still at home then. And let's see, in his family there was, Pop was the oldest, and then Aunt Flossie, and then Aunt Neva, and then Uncle Jack. And there was another child born in there somewhere that didn't live. Another thing I remember about my childhood was when we lived at a different place, and I was sick with something or other, and the bed was pushed up into a corner of the room. It was Mom and Pop's bed, I guess, and I was on that bed, and they called Dr. Hunt, old country doctor. Once upon a time I had a sore throat, and he swabbed my tonsils with iodine and made my nose bleed, and it made Mother so mad she didn't know what to do. She says, I'll never take her back to Dr. Hunt.
No.
But anyway, this time he had come to the house to see me, made a house call. And he brought his black bag and he set it down on the bed. And I backed up into the corner. And he says, what's the matter? Don't you like me? I said, yes, I like you, but I don't like your bag.
And then you ended up marrying somebody with one of those black bags.
Yep, yep,
Yes,
yep.
he did. When he first started practice, he had one of those black bags. As I said, Mother was a school teacher. I think she taught for several years. And I remember her telling about one incident when she was teaching, that this wasn't in Aquila, it was in some other small town nearby. She did something that made one of the men in the neighborhood mad. I guess that she had failed his kid or something. Anyway, he was sending threats in her direction, and it frightened her. And she started out to go see the family and try to straighten things out with them. And she said she was walking down the stairs to go out and see them, and she heard a voice say, "Don't go." And she always thought that was an angel's voice that spoke to her. And so she didn't go. She went back upstairs, and nothing ever came of it. So anyway, when I started to school, she took my first grade reader, and she helped me with the words. And of course, it only had about a dozen words on that first page, I guess. And I read through it to her. I read through it so many times that I memorized it. And the first day at school, teacher had me stand up and read from the first page of the book, and I put the book up like this, and then I stood looking at the kids around and recited what was on the page. I remember she made me stop and look at the words when I was reading. Another thing I remember about going to school, the first winter, I guess, that I went to school, I walked. It was a small town, and I wasn't very far from the school. And it was cold weather, and she put long underwear on me, and I wore long stockings. But I didn't like that. I didn't want to wear that, but I had to wear it. So I walked till I was outside of the house, and I can remember rolling those stockings down and rolling that underwear up. And I stayed that way until I walked back home and I reversed the process. And let's see. One of my favorite things was when we would go to Whitney. That's the next town down the road. And because that's where Mother's family lived. And I would play with my cousins there. And I always enjoyed playing with them. And one thing I remember was that Grandpa had a storm cellar. For those of you who don't know what a storm cellar is, in Texas and wide open spaces, there are a lot of tornadoes come by. And a storm cellar is a good place to hide from them. Mm-hmm. It was, you dig a hole, put boards or something over the top of it, and then pile the dirt back up on top in a V shape like this. And then there was a door here that you would pull down, sit there in that storm cellar till the storm went by, and then come out. But this pile of dirt up here like this was a great place to play. And we'd run up and play King of the Hill. Somebody was King of the Hill, and they'd try to push everybody else back down.
You didn't get any fights with your brothers?
No brothers and no sisters.
You didn't set any drapes on fire?
No, I didn't set any drapes on fire.
I introduced her to a big family when she came.
Yeah, I was glad to move into a big family because I hadn't had that.
Say, name all your cousins on your mother's side too, then.
Well, as many as
And
I
aunts
can
and
think
uncles.
of them. There were a lot of them because she was one of 9 children. And let's see, her oldest sister, they called her Sis. Her name was Princess Orienta.
Princess Orienta, wow.
Elder was her last name, and her husband's name was John Bunyan Elder. He was the constable in town, and he went by Bun, so he was on the Bun. And they had one daughter, and her name was Mary Frances, and I was trying to think of her name the other day. Couldn't think of it, but it came to me now. And then the next daughter was Aunt Maud. No, not Aunt Maud. Wait a minute. I have to think.
I remember an Aunt Maud.
Yeah, it was Aunt Sis. No, the one that moved out west. Well, I'll think of it after a while. Anyway, Mother said Aunt Sis was a good-looking young lady, and there was some fellow that had his heart set on her, and she turned him down, and she married Uncle Bun. So then he turned his attention to the next sister down, the one I can't think of the name of at the moment. And so he married her, and one day she did something that he didn't like, her husband didn't like, and she was pregnant at the time, and he turned her over his knee and spanked her.
Ooh.
And it made Grandpa so mad that he ordered him off the place and says, "Don't you come back anymore."
Whoa.
And so he took my aunt, and they moved away to West Texas, and they never came back. Ed Wallace was his name. Now I can't, what's the Uncle Ed's name? Zilla. Her name was Zilla, Zilla. And so I never saw her very many times. Then the next child was Uncle Charlie, and he moved down to the Rio Grande Valley. And eventually I may mention more about that. And then there was, let's see, Charlie there. Mother was next. And there was me. And then the next was Aunt Bertha. And they lived in Whitney, and they had 3 daughters. There was Judy and Billy, and she was about 4 years older than I. And then Bobby Sue, who was just younger than I. And by the way, Billy is the one who influenced me greatly in my Christian experience, because she decided to go to Southwestern to Keene to school. And so after seeing how well she liked it and all that, that's when I decided to go to school there, and that was the beginning of the pathway I took. Thank you, Lord. And,
Her name was Billy.
Billy. Her name was Annabelle, but she didn't like Annabelle, so she decided she was going to be Billy.
And she married a man named
Dark Rhodes.
Rhodes.
Rhodes. Okay, I don't know. I remember you calling her Billy Gilly. I was thinking it's because we're
Yeah, no, that was her. That
just
was
a nickname.
Maiden name.
That was her maiden name.
Gilly was her maiden name. Okay.
Yeah, that was, what was his first name? Doc. They called him Doc. His name was Adolphus. And his family had come from Louisiana. I think they
Your
were German.
uncle's name was Adolphus.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Don't you mean Dark Rhodes?
No, let's see, it was Aunt Bertha Adolphus. That's what we knew him as. But his own friends called him Doc Gilly. Then, let's see, after Aunt Bertha was Uncle Trav. His name was Travis, but he was Uncle Trav.
He was a wiry old little guy.
Yeah, they were all small. All the
Charlie was the rough one, though. One day, I'll tell this on her. He was in a nursing home, and he and his roommate got in an argument and a fuss. And the first thing you know, they were at fisticuffs.
these 2 nursing home men.
And then his mother came to him and said, Charlie,
No, that was his sister.
her sister, said, Charlie, you know, Jesus wouldn't do that. He said, yeah, but Jesus didn't have to live with that old man.
And before he went to the nursing home, he had an old tractor that he was doing some kind of farming with, and he rode that old tractor up and down the road. And even at dusk one time, he was on that tractor and didn't have any lights on it, and somebody ran up on him and bumped the tractor and knocked him off, but didn't hurt him. He's a tough old bird. Let's see now.
Let me give you a lesson.
Okay, well, wait, let me finish
Let her
the
finish her.
Yeah, tree.
family tree. Let's see, after Uncle
After Trav.
Trav was Aunt Maud, and she married a man named Wallace, Uncle Ed Wallace. And is that right? I think so. And they had 3 children, and
Maud was as big as this whole divan.
most of them were thin, but Aunt Maud evidently got all the fat there was in the family. And there was Evelyn and Bobby.
Judy.
No, not that. Judy was Aunt Bertha's daughter.
No, so was Evelyn and Bobby.
No, they weren't. I know him, honey. He likes to tell me what to think.
Somebody has to.
Can't pay for that.
Where did Uncle Buddy come in on this?
He was the oldest.
Okay, did you mention him first? I
I
missed.
don't think I did.
No, I don't think you
He
did.
was the oldest, and he worked on the railroad. I don't know, I forgot. I think he was a conductor, maybe.
What was
And
his real name?
He never married. His name was Luther.
Luther, that's right.
Luther Truitt.
And he's the one that liked to tease Grandma. And one day he said, Mother, I don't believe that Jonah swallowed the whale. She says, yes, he did, Luther. Yes, he did, Luther. No, Mother, Jonah didn't swallow the whale. And then she thought, she was, oh.
He was one's funeral we were going to when we came upon a log truck.
Was that trip? Okay, yeah.
Lost his logs.
Yeah, I remember that.
And a truck had run into the back of the logs.
Yeah.
And the guy had gone off the road and the cab was on fire.
Oh, boy, yeah.
It had messed it up so he couldn't open the doors. I went over there and I couldn't get him out.
Right there, Mother.
Yeah, I remember that very well.
Mother. You're looking for your
And
pencils right
they
there.
said that, I heard after I was grown that the reason Uncle Buddy never married was that he fell in love with a married woman. And back then they didn't trade mates the way they do today. And so I think they maintained some sort of a relationship. But anyway, it was sort of a sad story that he didn't get the woman he wanted, so he never married. Now let's see, down to the last one of the family, and that was the youngest one of that family, and she married when she was 40 years old. And her name was Fay. And that's where I got my name.
Oh,
I was named for her. And so I was always her favorite. And I can remember her giving me her hand-me-down clothes, and I loved them. I'd much rather have her hand-me-down clothes than anything new. And Mother would make my clothes most of the time, and lots of times out of flour sacks. Now back then you bought flour in a cloth bag, and the manufacturers were smart enough to put prints on those bags, and you could use those bags after you emptied the bag of flour to sew, make things with. And she would make...
And advertise for
Well, there wasn't any advertising on it. It
Yeah,
was
prints.
just print.
but people knew
It was flowers.
people knew whose was whose, huh?
No, it was a nice cloth. And she'd make my dress and usually bloomers to match them. So where was I?
I'm about to run out of battery here. I may need to go
about
swap.
the flour sacks.
Yeah, but